So good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm really happy that we are able to be together to connect our hearts and minds and voices in this gathering. And to those of you whom I have yet to meet, I am Maureen Walker. And I want to say that for more than 3 decades now, I believe the Colloquium, which is a gathering for conversation about ideas of cultural significance. The Colloquium has been a signature event started by our founding scholar, Jean Baker Miller, along with other women and men who've contributed to the relational cultural approach to healing over the past 40 or so years. And we are so grateful today to be able to continue and build on this legacy, this early work now in a virtual format. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in the conversation today. Our topic today is when relationships hurt. One of the truths we hold in common is that relationships are necessary. Relationship is the necessary source of our growth and healing. And we know that survival, physical, spiritual, emotional survival is not possible without relationship. Jean Baker Miller used to say that we come into our being through action and relationship. And we also know that relationship can be the site of chronic suffering and terrifying pain. And I am grateful today for these three conversation leaders who have the breadth of experience and the depth of heart and mind to help us engage this profound paradox. When relationships hurt, bringing RCT, Relational Cultural Theory, to survivors and perpetrators of domestic violence. So let me say something briefly about the three of them. Myriam Barenbaum, whom I'm waving at, she's waving back, is a clinical social worker who specializes in trauma. For the past 3 decades, she has been working at a community mental health center in Yonkers, New York, as part of their trauma team, providing both individual therapy and supportive group therapy to survivors of domestic violence, as well as to others. She currently co-facilitates a weekly Zoom support group for survivors, and she incorporates relational cultural theory in both individual and group work. Ryan Lane. Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
Ryan has a Master of Social Work and works as an adolescent and adult psychotherapist for Casa de los Niños in Tucson, Arizona. Ryan has served as a U.S. Navy hospital corpsman in multiple countries and as a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar. During graduate school, Ryan completed an internship and later worked as a domestic violence intervention later worked as a domestic abuse intervention program as a facilitator of nonviolent groups for men who have been court-ordered to treatment for battering and domestic violence. I butchered that, but I think you got the idea. Ryan incorporates relational cultural theory into his work as a therapist, where he works with male and female clients from a wide range of ages, socioeconomic, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds, many of whom are victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. Ryan remains committed to understanding and learning ways to address, prevent, and begin to heal the wounds inflicted by trauma. After Ryan and Myriam are in conversation, Mary Vicaro will offer initial reflections on the conversation. Mary is a licensed professional clinical counselor supervisor who fell in love with, and these are her words, fell in love with relational cultural theory when she started attending the Learning from Women conferences that were held in Boston back in 1994. It was during these conferences that she first heard Amy Banks introduce relational neuroscience. Since that time, Mary has been applying relational neuroscience to her work with youth ages 2 to 10 years old and has been working with other individuals. This has been integral to her work with individuals who are living with intellectual um, differences and developmental differences. As the founder of Finding Hope Consulting, Mary offers training and consultation to organizations, state agencies, therapists, and survivors of trauma. So let me say a little bit about or outline the sequence of today's program. I mentioned before, Myriam and Ryan will have a conversation with each other, sharing insights drawn from their experience and of course, questions from their experience. And you may notice that some of their observations may derive from differing standpoints, but will share a common goal. Mary Vicaro will then respond to the conversation. She will also offer her own insights. As I mentioned, Mary has devoted her life work to creating trainings and establishing centers of hope and healing for people who are caught in the trauma of violent relationships. After Mary responds, we will then invite your comments, your responses, your curiosities and questions, anything you want to share with the group. And I want to thank Harriet Schwartz and Amy Banks, who will be watching the chat function and who will also help us to facilitate this conversation with each other. At this point in the program, I will invite you to use the chat function to either pose a question that you want to be read by one of us or to ask to be called on. You may also use the raise hand function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen in reactions. We need all of us to be present during this conversation, so we ask that you kindly refrain from using public chat during the presentation. And we will also ask you to mute your microphone so that we can be optimally available to each other. So with that, let us get started. I will mute my microphone and we will start to listen with Myriam and Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be a little funny. I'm trying to figure out visually how to do this. I think probably what I'm going to do is put it on speaker so that when Ryan's speaking, I really see him. Maybe you want to do the same when I'm speaking, you can see me, because we're trying to have a conversation, but in Zoom we can't. It's hard to actually make that happen. So that may work for folks. I don't know, but we can definitely try that. So we've got about 20 minutes for our conversation, and we really look forward to the discussion and questions afterwards. So really looking forward to hearing from all of you. Before we begin, I thought it was important for us to kind of position ourselves in our work. And I wanted to say a couple of things, just positioning myself, and then Ryan will say some things too. Obviously, I'm an older, white, cisgender. I wrote mostly neurotypical, heterosexual woman. And in this context, I'm working primarily with a group of Black and Latinx women. And I'm doing that with my co-leader is a Black woman as well. And the women that we work with, I think is really important to know that they have left their violent relationship. So we are not working with women who are, currently in danger, though, of course, they're always somewhat in danger, or many of them still feel in danger, and some of them are still somewhat in danger, but we're not working with people that are actively in a domestic violence relationship. So I want to make sure that you know that. I also want to say I do work with white domestic violence survivors as well in individual therapy. So Ryan, do you want to kind of position yourself, and then I'll say a couple more things before we start?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name's Ryan. It's really, truly an honor to be here and to be speaking with everyone today. I am an Iranian American. Cisgendered heterosexual male, middle class. Again, I'm working as an adult and adolescent therapist. Primarily, I'm currently living in Duluth, but I'm working via telehealth for an organization in Tucson, Arizona. So I'm currently primarily working with Hispanic American adolescents and adults. While I was a facilitator for the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program, which is the home of the Duluth model and the Power and Control Wheel, I was co-facilitating these groups with a Caucasian cisgendered heterosexual woman who is a friend and a mentor, and our primary population was heterosexual men from a variety of socioeconomic and cultural and racial backgrounds.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so right. I did want to also note that the survivors that I work with are primarily heterosexual, and well, you just said for yourself, the perpetrators that you have worked with are primarily heterosexual as well. So that's what we'll be pretty much talking about today, because that's our experience. But we did want to acknowledge that men can also be victims of domestic violence, and that there's also domestic violence in the LGBTQ community as well. So, you know, if people have comments or experiences from that, we would absolutely love to hear that. That's not going to be our focus as much, because it's just not our experience just now. Okay. So yeah, Ryan, you want to start? So Ryan and I have been talking for, we've been having some conversations in preparation for this conversation, just to sort of figure out what we wanted to focus on. And we kind of came up with some things that we wanted to make sure to cover. So we're going to be asking each other a couple of questions to get at that. Right.
And so, yeah, we entitled this conversation, Myriam, myself, and Maureen kind of put our heads together, and we came up with When Relationships Hurt, Bringing RCT to Domestic Violence Survivors and Perpetrators. And I think that this really kind of gets at the heart of the conversations that we've had and where I hope we go. And Myriam, I'm just curious, in your experience, what do you think the role is of healing hurt in these kinds of dynamics with domestic violence? And right, with RCT, yeah. So I'm gonna, just with RCT. Thank you. That's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, because we could go real broad with that, but we're gonna try to stay on RCT. Yeah. So I think I want to say, just to start, a couple of things about what happens in domestic violence relationships through the lens of RCT. I mean, accepting some of the basic tenets of RCT, such as that we are wired to connect, right? That we grow through relationships throughout our lifetime, that we form relational images based on the relationships that we have, right? If you accept all of that, you have to know that domestic violence relationships really challenge all of that, right? So in DV relationships, where one person is exerting or trying to exert increasing control over another person, right? It creates not only pain and disconnection, but it also creates a lot of confusion. That's something that we really see a lot of confusion, where women question their experience, they question their sanity, and they absolutely question their value as human beings or as people to relate to in any sense. They question themselves as parents. It just really shakes the very foundation of their sense of self, right? So over time, what that does is it basically takes women into the territory of chronic disconnection. And I want to say that it's not just, I mean, obviously it's very painful to feel disconnected from the person who's supposed to be your partner. But what's even worse often, I think, for women is that they often disconnect from pretty much everybody in their world, partly because often abusers try to make that happen. They want there to be disconnection. They want to be the only connection for women. And so they will often actively try to discourage connection with friends, connection with family, etc. But what also happens is that women often feel so much shame about what's going on that they don't want anybody to know. They don't want their friends to know. They don't want their family to know. They really
So they really go into this real like shame state where that's just where they're hanging out and they're trying to survive. And they're very alone, right? So I just think it's, I think probably a lot of people, if they've really thought through what it must be like, probably know a lot of this stuff. But I think it's really important to kind of provide that framework for that. That's who's coming in. That's who I'm seeing, when they come to the clinic, when they come to the group, right? So when they come in, basically they're often in a state of condemned isolation, and I'm sure people know that term, which I think is one of the most powerful RCT terms, honestly. Feeling that somehow they must have done something to deserve this, feeling that they are faulty, that they are not deserving of being treated well, that they've ruined their kids, that they've, that there is sort of not much hope for them at all. So that's how they come into us. And, as I'm quoting Judy here, people who suffer with chronic disconnection and hold negative relational images often misattribute blame to themselves for their isolation. And I think that absolutely captures what we see when they come in. And so survivors often feel both feel broken down and brokenhearted, and they are not sure that they can ever hold their heads up again, never mind like have a healthy relationship or move forward in their lives in any kind of positive way, right? So, what we do when they come to us is we immediately try to offer them a different environment and a different relationship and a different sense of themselves, right? So, of course, empathy is going to be the very beginning, right? But it's also super important to offer them respect, right? And respect and validation for their experience, so that they know that they're not crazy. We also really want to let them know that it affects us, how it feels to hear about what happened to them, not in a, oh, I can't handle it way, not at all, but more so like, this should never have happened to you. I feel anger on your behalf. I feel outrage. This is not how, you didn't deserve this in any way, right? So we really share that personally with them, how it affects us to hear it while staying in relationship with them. We also want to let them know that they're not alone. And we really want to weave in psychoeducation about power and control. Ryan referenced the power and control wheel. I don't know how many people here are familiar with that, but it's a super helpful tool for everyone, I think, really to understand the dynamics of power and control. So we really try to give language to what they've experienced so that they understand that, first of all, they're not crazy. Second of all, there's a name for what they've experienced, right? There are names for what they've experienced. And it's often such a revelation to see that wheel and you see them like looking at the different categories and going, oh my God, like, yes, he did this financial control. And oh, he tried to control me through the kids too. And oh, he tried to make me feel like I was crazy. And oh, he threatened that he'd kill himself if I left. And, they see it there. And it's so validating for them to see that and to realize that this happens, there's names for it. And there's also names to, ways to work with it, right? I just want to see if there's anything else I want to say about that. Oh yeah, we really want to emphasize their strengths in having survived this experience, because a lot of times they're just focused on what they've done wrong and they're not realizing how they, what they've done to survive and how impressive that is. And then we want to get them, if we can, we want to get them in with a group of other survivors, because what we've seen is that can have even more powerful healing effects than one-on-one therapy. And we'll be talking about that in a while. So I'm going to now ask Ryan, because I found it so fascinating talking to Ryan, because I've never worked with perpetrators. So Ryan, I'm going to kind of switch that question around on you and ask you, how would you answer the question of how RCT is instrumental in healing, particularly with perpetrators, who are often bringing hurt inside of them into their relationships where they're causing harm?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And I just want to also acknowledge that I can be a talker and I'm passionate about this topic. So please feel free to project. This concept of condemned isolation, I certainly think that the perpetrators who I have worked with at DAIP, the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program, they are coming in a state of condemned isolation as well.
Right.
However, it looks different. Broken down, possibly brokenhearted, not always.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the dynamics are different. In terms of healing the hurt that comes with working with domestic violence, I agree with what you're saying, that this starting place of empathy, and I know I've heard Maureen Walker talk about that. Mutuality is a place where you're guaranteed to be treated with dignity, but it does not guarantee that you will be comfortable. And so, and you've talked about disruptive empathy. So I think that for me, one of the things that really I think about with RCT is, how am I going to have an effective conversation with somebody who may not be brokenhearted. They may actually have belief systems, and if there is hurt, there's so much protection and callous around that hurt that they really don't want to look at it. And I mean, most of the guys that I've seen come into DAIP say, I didn't do anything. Why isn't she here? She's the one. So this question of what he did, or the question of what she did is not a very relevant question when trying to work with perpetrators. It's more starting with looking at oneself, and then really trying to emphasize on what the impact of their behavior is, and that takes time. That starts with myself and all facilitators being able to really recognize that although these very egregious behaviors have occurred, that we really be mindful of our own position of power and try to extend an environment in which people truly will be treated with dignity and respect, so that there is the possibility of some amount of trust and relationship to grow. And that takes time. And luckily we have time. I mean, it's a 26-week program, so it doesn't work for everybody, but that it starts with me being able to set back a little bit of my own bias and being able to really try to offer an environment where I can, and where we can try to hold space for him to be able to look at himself and be able to understand the dynamics of power and control enough to be able to not be collusive with his beliefs. That we're not there to be client-centered. We are there to be thinking about her and what her experience is in those dynamics. And so even if I have not met her, I know enough about domestic violence, and I know my co-facilitator knows enough about domestic violence to be able to understand that there is more to this story. And we're trying to help him be able to get to that place of being able to see what she experiences within a relationship, and hopefully through understanding that experience can really see that I don't actually want to do that to people. I don't want to do that to my children. But that starts with me being able to recognize my own place. That starts with me being able to try to create an environment of calm, awareness, resonance, energy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah. So do you want to ask me the question about groups? And I'm going to ask you more, because we're going to go on with this.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And that piece about groups, we did talk about this, that a group dynamic is very different than a one-on-one individual therapy session. And I'm just curious how in your experience of working with survivors in group settings, like how has that been for you? How do those relationships change and affect the healing process?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to watch that, because individual therapy, I think, of course, it can be very helpful in providing a secure, one-on-one relationship, and giving women a place to process all the feelings that come up around having been in a domestic violence relationship, right? So it's helpful. And I think it's, just from what I've just seen people grow by leaps and bounds from being in a group in a different way. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that's like and why, right? So it's funny, I was looking back through some of the RCT literature and, in the last few weeks, just thinking about all of this. And Jean and Irene said in the Healing Connection, they said, when someone goes with us in the feelings, we're more able to believe that our feelings are legitimate. And I think, yes, it's great that a therapist goes with them in their feelings, but the people that can really go with them in their feelings are other women that have been through this. And so what I've seen time and time again are women coming into the group and just being, you'd think they might know or have heard that there are others, but there's something about the actual experience of like, oh my goodness, you too, like I'm not alone. It's just kind of, I'm just getting goosebumps even talking about it, because every time it's sort of like, it's just a revelation. And so women realize they're not alone. They don't feel judged because these women have been through it too. I mean, they don't feel judged, and they don't feel shame the way that they had been feeling it, because they're in a group of women that are all like holding their heads up, and some of them are further along in the journey, and so that's really important for them to see, like, oh, I'm here now, but I can be there. I can get there. I'm actually seeing a person right in front of me who has gotten there. How did you do that, right? And then it's just really beautiful too to see the women that are a little further along, to see themselves reflected in the new women that are coming in, because sometimes they then can see, wow, yeah, I really have done a lot. I really have come. And we had group yesterday, actually. I'm just going to tell a really quick story, but one of the women that's been coming to group for quite some time, and now she's gone back to school, and school is meeting online, and she can't come when we have group, but whenever she can, if there's like a break in her classes, she tries to pop in. And yesterday she just happened to pop in when someone else who had been away from group for a little while has just come back, right? And this woman who's going to school was just able to share her, and she really cried about feeling so proud of herself for not listening to all the negative voices that told her she can't move forward. And the other woman was just like going, I am so glad you showed up today. Like, I needed to hear you today. Like, I needed to be reminded you helped me. She helped her with her GED, the other one. And she said, you're where I hope to be. And if you hadn't come, like, I wouldn't have just believed like it's possible. And I really needed to see you. I really needed to hear you today. So it's just a wonderful thing to see how they help each other, and just the community that we create, right, for them. So yeah, they really get a sense of power with rather than power over in that experience. And it's very powerful for them. And I think the community aspect too, I mean, I'm going to stop in a minute because I don't want us to run out of time, but when we met in person, we used to have a group for the children, and then we also had daycare for other children, and then we would all have dinner together afterwards. And so that was so fantastic, and we would have Christmas parties, and we would have Thanksgiving, and they had community, like they really had community where they really could help each other and feel no shame and just pride in moving forward and like helping each other and encouraging each other. So that's where I just saw group being something that I could never offer as an individual therapist. And, just I'm so glad to be able to combine them, So what about you, Ryan? Like, tell me, the groups that you did, because it was so different. Like you and I talked about where you started with the men, that was so different than where we start with the women, and about the whole question of accountability, right? So yeah, tell us a little.
So, and I think that this is a really important piece, that domestic violence is, obviously we've said, a very complex relational problem. And one thing that I think about with my groups, they're not my groups, but the groups that I sorry,
No, I understand.
yeah, with the people at DAIP, the men who are in the groups, they are court mandated. The
Right.
Duluth model was built on it's not, it was created on the premise that domestic violence is a community problem. It is not, and it is a community responsibility. It is not on the individual. And so part of my role as a facilitator is to understand that when somebody has come to the group, they have gone through a very complex community coordinated response that has been tied with training police officers on the understanding of the dynamics, the power dynamics in domestic violence, how to be able to interview somebody so that they're giving a survivor dignity, such as if somebody has just experienced domestic violence, don't start with, well, ma'am, have you been drinking? Because
Right.
it's going to shut down the entire thing, and they're not going to trust you to be able to give the information to be able to actually create an effective case. And so there's been relationship and community coordination between the women's shelter, probation, laws that are written, how police officers react, the ability for police to have relationships with the community, although this is not a perfect process, but that's the goal. And through these relationships, this is what the Duluth model is founded on. The idea behind the groups, Ellen Pence, the founder of this, said, men who go to prison find love of Jesus, they never find respect of women. And so the idea is that through these groups, we can do that. Now, where does that start? It starts with looking at actions. So what we're trying to get to belief systems, and this piece about wounds and things like that, we strive to get there, but it starts with looking at the power and control wheel, and starting with, what did you do? Not what did she do, but what did you do? And being able to talk about that. And we write out verbatim what people say. It may start with watching a clip on domestic violence and then look at what that was.
Right.
And then we start looking at that.
Like what he did, even if it's not you, but he.
Right,
Yeah.
what did he do? And then suddenly it's like, well, I don't remember seeing that in the clip. This is kind of becoming more about you, it sounds like. But we end up with that. Then what was the intention behind those actions?
Right.
What is your belief system about her? That's when we can look at beliefs. We can't just get to beliefs, but what is your beliefs about her that has made this possible?
Right.
Where did those beliefs come from? And this is where trauma often comes up, but not always. Sometimes it's addiction. Sometimes it's
Culture.
through society and culture. There's a lot of reasons that breed these belief systems. And it's not always a trauma piece, but it can be. It oftentimes is. And then what is the impact? What is the impact on your children? What is the impact on her? What is the impact on you? A lot of men, they're not really at a place where they're ready to have very much very much empathy for their partner. Oftentimes it's their kids that it starts with.
Yep.
And that is a motivator.
Right.
But through the process, the men develop relationships with each other they do hold each other accountable, especially as they go through the program. And oftentimes when there's a man who's new, or sometimes you just have to accept, sometimes they're not ready to learn today. And they can create very, very good examples for people, other members of the group, to be able to see, wow, like, I don't want to be like that. That's not the kind of man I want to be. And not everybody changes, but it does have a lot of impact on a lot of people.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. Maureen, I know we're watching the time, like we're probably about done with time, right?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, we can't hear you, Maureen. No, it wasn't you. It's just, we talked about what we hope to talk about.
We're just so drawn in here. And I was thinking we could take maybe 3 more minutes with the 2 of you, and then Mary, and then we will all join in. Thank you.
Great. Ryan, something that you just said that I thought was so interesting. I don't think we talked about this, but it's so interesting that you just said that, that it's often the kids, right? That it's not that, and it's often the kids that get the women to leave, right? Like they won't leave for themselves, but they don't want to have their kids. So I just found that so fascinating from the 2 different ends, right?
Yeah, it is so interesting how these dynamics, like the difference between the 2, like there, it's a totally different approach. And it's been very, I agree with you that, yeah, kids are huge. And I also just wanted to say that I also really agree with you on this piece about like the difference between the group versus individual sessions. It's been so challenging for me, having worked in this, to start doing therapy on a one-on-one session, and going from a survivor-centered educational group about domestic violence to trying to have client-centered one-on-one interactions with people who are, it's a lot more challenging to do one-on-one, and the dynamics are just very different.
Right. And I'm sure also, like, I have both, right? I know that I can do individual, and also I've got the group, but you, in your current setting, you don't have the group to also do. And it just must be hard to, like, something's missing here, a big piece, right?
Right. It oftentimes feels that way. And I do still, like, when I'm working with men, like, even victims of domestic violence, I'm still always even male victims of domestic violence, the way that I'm going to approach it is still going to be different than the way I'm going to approach working with a woman who has been in a violent relationship. At least that's what I've experienced so far in my path.
Do you want to say one more thing about that, and then we'll stop? Because I can't just leave it there. I mean, come on, like, don't we want to know?
Well, yeah, it seems to me, and this is something that actually comes from DAIP that I learned as well, is that because there are women's domestic violence groups at DAIP as well, and but the dynamics are different. It's much easier to get women to talk about generally what happened, like, I stabbed him with a tweezers, or whatever happened, versus men generally, when they come in, almost universally, I didn't do anything. I did not do, I don't want to talk about it. I didn't do it. She should be here. And the power dynamics, the physical power dynamics are, and the mental biases that go into it just are different. And so
But you said you were talking about male domestic violence victims and how you work with them differently. Like, I was just curious about that. We can count this as one of our first questions. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just want to hear what he says.
No, I am still really trying, when I'm working with men who are victims of domestic violence, I'm still seeing a lot of power and control. At least that's what I'm experiencing. I don't know. It's not my forte, but it's something I'm coming in contact
studying
with
now. Yeah.
And I still find that starting with actions is important. I still find that the looking at tapping into his belief systems is it's not a question of if you're on the power and control wheel as a man, generally, myself included. It's where am I on the power and control wheel?
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to really be able to understand domestic violence, I have to look at that pretty carefully. I have to look at it in myself. I have to look at it in my male clients,
Beautiful.
even when they're victims.
Yep. Thank you. That's a great stopping point. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for for launching us so thoughtfully and safely into this emotionally complex and I think intellectually challenging territory. So now let us invite Mary Vicaro to join the conversation. Mary, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation today. Thank you everyone for coming, and wow, thank you for such a uplifting talk that combines so many parts of relational cultural theory on both sides of what is often seen as a spectrum that has no middle. And I think the power of the relational cultural theory piece that you all bring in is that you pull us to that middle. And even though you may be coming at it from different ways, one of the things I heard very clearly that both of you look at is, one, what did you do to survive? And for the women, and for the gentlemen, what did you do? You both start with action. And I think that's so powerful, especially from a relational neuroscience perspective.
Right.
Because I think one of the things it taught us is that our cortex, if we have the handbrain, vagus nerve, brain stem, limbic system, felt safety, attachment regulation, and cortex is not in charge until our fear center gives it permission.
Right.
And what that vagus nerve sends to every organ in our body drives our action. So if we can start with the empowering action of what you did to survive, we can start to fill people so they can start to have the zest they need for the clarity and start to rebuild that self-esteem, which gives them the productivity and creativity to do this difficult work of finding the middle and finding their worth, which in the end gives them a desire for more connection. And then Ryan, on your side, I hear, what did you do? And where are you on this power and control wheel, starting with yourself? So that then gives them an experience of power with, which then makes it safe enough for them to start to maybe explore, what did I do? And then from what I did, what belief may have been connected with that, and putting their whole brain together. So once again, they can feel energy from the connection of putting the pieces together instead of the energy of violence and power over control. And you walk them into that so gently and with the clarity of starting with where you are. Where am I on the power and control wheel? Which makes it safe enough for them to more clearly look at that, which then I think really comes from when we know what we know from self-esteem is either it's my fault or it's not my fault. Both come from a lack of self-esteem. Shame drives both. And so you can help lift them out of that shame by just starting with, hey, I'm a human too. Here's where I am. And then I think that allows for the productivity and the creativity and the ability. I love when you said, when they're not connecting that day or they're not in a place to learn, we don't excuse it. We let it be. We let it be a visual so they can, other people can say, you know, I don't want to be that guy, which is different than it's his fault. It's her fault. I don't want to be that guy. You helped get it to a visceral spot for them. And I think that then builds the desire for more connection, which allows them to actually connect with one another in a way that allows them to explore new things, just like the women are connecting with one another and being able to have that visual pathway that you need to build a new neural network. Oh, this is what I could look like. You know, when you have that poverty of experience, you can't build the new neural network. And it's so powerful how relational cultural theory can take us from two ends of an extreme and help us have power with each other to walk toward the middle, which reminds me so much of Maureen's, one of my favorite quotes of yours, Maureen. And I'm gonna butcher it, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. Mutuality is a place where you challenge my comfort and I challenge yours. And then we walk through that discomfort together. And you all are doing that on both ends of that spectrum, using the 5 good things. So thank you for the amazing work you do and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
So
I was going to say, I'm happy to jump in and just start the question and answer part of this, because there's a, as you may be able to see already, we have a plethora of really great questions here. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm just going to start with Denise, and I'm just going to make a comment about this. Denise Joyka had mentioned a while ago, doesn't trauma of any kind result in confusion? And so I think that's a little bit of a rhetorical and naming, but to remind people that yes, trauma disintegrates us, right? And we're usually most not confused when we're using our head and our heart and everything coming together, right? And our relationships coming together. And so, yes, I think the short answer is, I think it does. If other people want to weigh in, certainly do. But I think the other thing is, it's also clear that interpersonal violence does something extra negative to a person's sense of the capacity to be valued and respected and whatnot in relationship. So Sandra says, can you say more about the ways in which you facilitate the formation or the growth of empathy? So for both of you, or all three of you.
I don't know. I would think Ryan, I mean, I think, Ryan, I'd actually like to hear your response on that, because I mean, yeah, I think with the women, it's not that empathy is lacking. It's maybe empathy's been lacking towards them, right? But so, yeah, I mean, so Ryan, I think you're more the person who tries to actually grow empathy in the people that you work with, right?
Yeah, this is a question that keeps me up at night. So because I do think that I'd like to think that I'm growing empathy, and I don't always know that I am. What I do know is that my goal is to plant seeds, I guess, more than grow them. And I know, and the process of doing that is by bringing perspective and understand awareness. So one of the philosophers that is really the Duluth model is built on, but it really goes with relational cultural theory, is Paulo Freire, and he talked about that through meaningful dialogue, we grow awareness, and that can lead to enlightenment. He said it much more eloquently than I can. He's an incredible writer, but it does start, as Mary said, with our hand brains. In group, this is why RCT is so important, and the 5 good things care. In the groups, if I'm going to have any shot at growing empathy, or if they are going to have any shot of having empathy grow in them, I need all of their brains online. I need all 3 of them. So it doesn't work here. It starts with a calm, safe place where you really, really can be open to seeing other perspectives. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways we're dealing with Piaget's ball. If you think about like the pre-operant stages, where you have a child who has a two-sided ball and he can only see one color and he can't see the other person's perspective. Our goal in this is really trying to show that other perspective through planting seeds. We can't control that it's going to happen. We can't necessarily make people feel anything, but we can at least make sure that as a community response, even if they don't feel anything, even if they walk out still hating their partner, that they know that if they do this in Duluth, there will be response. There will be response. It is not advantageous to commit domestic violence in Duluth, Minnesota.
Yes. I actually, a friend put in a really good comment in the chat, which I think is important to address, which is, yes, self-empathy for the women. That's a whole different story. And yes, absolutely, we do work with that. And I think, again, part of that is, because being in a group, right? Would you be that harsh with her? Like if they're being very hard on themselves, would you talk to your friend over here that way? If she had, we use a lot of that, but I think, yeah, that's a very good point and so important. Yeah, because a lot of times that's lacking, and actually a lot of times that's been lacking in their earlier lives, which is also partly why they may have gotten involved in relationships that were not particularly empathic to begin with, right? So very good question.
Can I
I
just,
would like
Mary,
to say
yeah, Mary.
also, oh, go ahead.
go ahead,
No,
Maureen.
go Maureen.
Okay, I just wanted to sort of point us all to one of the older working papers that Jean wrote, Connections, Disconnections, and Violations. And I think it is in that paper that she says one of the first things that happens when we are violated is that we disconnect from our own experience.
Right.
And so this notion of empathy for self is a very important notion, also distinguished from, quote, the kind of pitying regards that one might have for oneself that again comes from that place of fear and
Right.
shutting down. So I just wanted to point people to that working paper.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think one thing, Myriam, that both you and Ryan mentioned is they both can find empathy usually around the children. And that's almost like this fulcrum. And I think it does allow them to go back. And sometimes we ask it directly when we're working with people is, what do you wish your life was like when you were your child's age? And then once they can connect with what they wish their life had been like, wow, how can we offer that to your child? Because then your brain responds as if you're getting it, because you're never too old to have a happy childhood.
Exactly.
That's the power of neuroplasticity. You're never too old to have a happy childhood. How do you want to offer to your child what your brain still needs? Because you can get it. And I think you two both mentioned that they can both somewhat get there through the kids. So what a powerful fulcrum that is for the work you do of balance and safety.
I love that. That sounds like a t-shirt, right? You can never be
Yeah.
have a happy childhood.
Love that. Me too. Love.
I think to add to this, Zuzana has a comment that kind of flows with this. Is it possible abusive men are more moved by their harm to their children because the parent-child relationship allows them to maintain their identity as a powerful man? It doesn't require equality, whereas seeing the harm, whoops, somebody just put a question in and bumped me. The harm to their partner would require them to see her as an equal, like feels like losing power. I wonder if, Ryan, you might have something that, some observations on that.
Yeah, possibly. I think it really depends. I wish that I had a concrete answer for you, but it really seems to depend. Domestic violence, there are similarities within the power and control wheel, and there are trends, but there are also differences from person to person. And so I think that probably is true. I think that there are some people that go through this program and they don't come out having any changes, and they have no interest or care about about the impact that they're having. I've also seen I know one client that really moved me, who I worked with, or one man talked about how his 4-year-old son, he sleeps, he looks safer when he sleeps, and he just looks somehow like he sleeps better, and the guy was really moved by that, and that his kids are willing to give him hugs, and and there are also clients who they actually, this power over that they assume, whether they're aware of it or not, they and many of them are, but it does cause isolation for them, in chronic isolation. They cannot experience love in any kind of authentic way from a partner, without having some semblance of equality. And so they do oftentimes discover that they are chronically alone, and they are chronically lonely and isolated. And so through shifting from the power and control wheel to concepts of equality,
Right.
respect, they do actually oftentimes, and I do think this is where empathy can happen more, or grow, is that they actually do receive a certain amount of authentic connection, again through the process of trying to show up in a more equitable way to relationships with their partners or future partners.
Yep. But let me fold this question in, because well, it's all about the same thing. But Constance says, I hear you're saying the focus for the male perpetrator is to think about the survivor and her experience rather than what she did. Quote, is it ever appropriate to allow the men to explore what their triggers are related to what the women did?
I would think so.
You know, is that a question for me, or is that I just
think it's a question for everybody.
I think it is a question for everyone.
Why don't we let someone else talk, and then
Yeah, Mary, do you have any comments in that regard?
Yes, and I always, part of it is my very concrete brain, but part of it is the power of relational neuroscience. To me, is when I hear things like appropriate and inappropriate, I plug in safe and unsafe. So when is it safe to allow them to explore their triggers? So that by exploring their triggers, it doesn't block their ability to see their active role in what's happened. So when I rephrase the question to when is it safe to, that helps me answer the question. So my brain kind of does an automatic switch because I'm doing it all day with people, but it just seems to bring the volume down, and it gives you a better, a more level playing field. And I think that's the power of the laws in Duluth. You know, if you choose to leave here, just know in Duluth, we choose safety for people, even in intimate relationships. And there will be consequences, because safety is what matters in Duluth. And that becomes a power with instead of a power over. Even if you're enforcing that safety. This is about safety, which is the power of making domestic violence a community issue. If the community doesn't protect the safety of the most vulnerable of people in intimate relationships, then the community has set up a structure that is reinforcing power over as the only way to get safety. So that was probably a long answer to that short question. But
good answer.
That's a good answer.
Very
Right.
helpful.
it is, and I would just add as well that in men's groups, when somebody is truly, by the time they get to a group, they have gone through a process again that requires community relationships with the police, courts, all of this, to a point that her triggers, whatever he perceives is her triggers, I think I do agree that there is a place for that. It's not always a very effective conversation in the context of this population, in these groups. Now I think that that's a place that maybe, or I wonder, I don't know if this is a place where one-on-one therapy or ongoing therapy after could be very, very useful. It seems that, at least from in my experience, which is ongoing and learning, that prioritizing safety and being able to look at one's belief systems and the impacts that those have, their actions and their beliefs, and the relationship between them, and how they impact ongoing relationships is important. Is an important starting point. And looking at triggers and things like that may be things that would be better served afterwards, so that we don't have an entire group going down, well, yeah, she does this, and yes, it's such an easy,
See that happening.
it's really,
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. You don't want to go.
Right. When is it safe to? And to define triggers as they're not an excuse, they're a responsibility. So once you know what takes your cortex offline, it's your job to predict when it's going to happen, practice what you want to do about it, and have a plan B in case all else fails, so everyone in the environment stays safe.
Love that. Triggers are a responsibility. That I think that's a t-shirt too.
Exactly. Triggers are a responsibility. Yeah.
Speaking of t-shirts, I wore one in honor of your talk, and it says, feeling safe is a human right.
Oh,
It's a gift
love
I got
that
for
too.
Yeah, so you all rock. Thank you for this.
I have to expand my wardrobe here.
So Lisa is asking, I'm wondering how much either of you bring in the acknowledgement that we live in a culture of oppression and violence, and how that directly relates to the person being a perpetrator and or victim of domestic violence.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, because I'm sure Ryan, I know Ryan, and Ryan's like, I've been talking too much, right, Ryan? Yeah. Yeah, I'll just say something and please add, Ryan, of course, and Mary too. I talk about that some. I think that it is important to have that context, but I think that, how do I put it? We're dealing at such a survival level. And, you know, I think what we're really focusing on is getting your life back into your own hands, you know, and it is important to know about the context, but I guess what I don't want to do is give any more of a sense that there are more forces working against you. You know, it's helpful and I bring it up, but I also, yeah, I think the best way I can just put it is that we are working at a survival level. You know, we are trying to build somebody up from the, you know, from the ground up. And I think once they're back, as my supervisor would say, in their shoes, you know, they're in their own shoes, they're standing on their own 2 feet again, then, well, it's like this again, right? It's, you know, right? When you're here, you can start absorbing bigger concepts. You can start putting things together in a whole different way. When you're, you know, when you're just trying to survive and you're like this a lot, that kind of information doesn't necessarily go in or help per se. You know, right. I'd love to hear, Mary and Ryan, what you would add to that. But
yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Actually, it just flew out of my never-endingly menopausal brain. So you go first, and hopefully it'll come back.
Well, all I was going to say, and I suspect this is probably what you wanted to say, right? Which is, you know, that explanation is a very cognitive understanding, right? Of, you know, of the dynamics, the dynamics in the world or in our country that leads to these kinds of things. And it's, so when you're, just like you're saying, when you're like this, your cognitive is there and it has direct contact to your amygdala. So it actually does something to settle it down. Mm-hmm. But when you're like this, right, then your amygdala is exposed, and then you do run the danger of that kind of information to feel like piling on, or I'm never going to get out of
Exactly.
it, or
That's
whatever.
right.
So
It's all against me, the stacked against me. And they have
Exactly.
enough of that. Lord knows, like our
Yes.
clients have enough of that
Thank
already.
you.
It sort of strikes me that all of that is so relevant. One of the things that I would say as well is that sometimes talking about you're not the only one is a way to break the isolation of the experience.
Yes.
And to talk about the cultural aspects of it is a way of bringing in a kind of universality. I think
That's
one of the
true.
things that I'm just so impressed, my heart is so full right now, listening to Myriam and Ryan and Mary, is because of how you meet people where they are. And if we are talking to everybody, it's, you know, like psychologists, we tend to write little notes to each other, then that kind of cognitive information is totally unsafe. But I think that there are ways that people, we do connect and engage that can say, let's break through the isolation of thinking that I'm the only one and you're a defective person, and, you know, so forth and so on. That can be really helpful.
Very true. And actually, Maureen, you're reminding me of something important. I'm sorry, Myra, I'll just say it real quick. And
No.
then you know, I'm just thinking about a really fascinating discussion that we ended up having in group about the strong Black woman. You know, like that discussion just took off and took fire. And, you know, also partly because my co-leader is Black, and she was, you know, she was right in there too. But yeah, that was really important for them to all share, and like, yes, I suffer from this too. And oh my God, you're, you know, like, right. And yeah, so that was huge. And that was something they really could hear and really could relate to. Yeah. It's like
And
they have
just,
to, it has to be real for them. It has
Right.
to be real. Yeah.
Yeah. Just talking about like languaging, my grandmother would not know what I was talking about if I said, well, I think we should have some sort of discourse on power dynamics and gender relations. But I do remember
Right.
hearing her, like from a kid going, I was going, ew, gross. But I remember her saying things like, oh, never tuck your tail for a man because it'll never get short enough. Now, if that if that wasn't
That's a way to
something
talk about it.
you know,
Right.
but that is talking about a cultural dynamic. So I don't want us to say we, I want to say let's think that we can do it all.
Well, and I think one way that you are, and thank you, Amy, for doing this, because it did bring my thinking brain right back online, is that you highlight what they've done to survive. And what they've done to survive this relationship also can help you survive this culture.
Yes.
Right. That is so true.
Building
Yes.
the blocks.
That is
Every
so
time
true.
you highlight what they've done to survive, you're giving them the tool to survive the next layer and the next layer and the next layer.
Love that.
So we always come back to, what did you do to survive? And what tool are we taking out of that toolkit and carrying forth to the next challenge?
Right.
So yes, and is it Maureen, or I forget which one of you says it, all growth occurs in relationship, and all relationships are embedded in culture. So how powerful to put all that together in a way that builds on what we've done to survive, instead of
Absolutely.
all the crap that's on top of us.
Right.
One thing
I think we have about 3 more minutes together. But
yes,
Amy is the
yes, no, keeping track. We've got a couple more minutes. Ryan, you were going to say?
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to add to that, at least in the experience of the groups that I've been a part of, and actually Myriam asked, we were talking about this a little bit about culture, and I think that the experience of the individual, like how culture is impacting the individual's worldview is really important. And what I see, at least in the groups, is at the time that these kinds of dynamics come up is at the point where you're asking, where you get to beliefs, and then where did beliefs come from? And then people really are able, it hits a point where people seem to be a lot more engaged, generally a lot more open to share their experiences. And that's where this really comes out. And I think a lot of times that's more effective than me trying to just talk about intersectionality right off of the bat, because a lot of people's experiences are different. My dad is from Iran. He's culturally Muslim and a staunch atheist, and there's just a lot of different belief systems that I think how one's worldview is and how they navigate the world, like when they're able to share those openly, safely in a group, that's where a lot of really meaningful conversations come in.
Thank you. I know we're winding down. I mean, one of the things that we had been thinking about just before we headed into this conversation today was sort of the idea of even having people form after chat groups, not but that if people are interested in trying to continue some of these conversations, you could post on the chat now, you could post, your contact information or what have you, and just see if there are people that want to kind of gather and continue the conversation. I mean, we're aware of, kind of limited time that we have and needing to, sign off sometime very soon. So, I just offer that if people do want to kind of put out information on the chat at this point, we'll keep that up for another, bunch of like 5 minutes or so. And you guys can write down or take a picture of, Harriet is also saying ICGC is now on Twitter at Growth and Connection.
Oh, good. There's a couple people that
like
look like they want to already.
Handful. Yeah, and there were, I hope people were also following some of the comments and the questions, because they were, very, even if we didn't get to them, very relevant and I think really added to a kind of this broadening of the conversation. Besides, what the three of you brought, including information. I mean, somebody was asking about international, how do you apply this to different cultures and, that sort of thing. So that's all I have for today.
Yeah, I'm so sorry we didn't get to all the questions too. I saw all this activity and I couldn't, pay attention to it when we were talking. And it's like, I hope we can save the questions and maybe find some way to address some of them or whatever. That would be great.
I think if we begin to think of this, I mean, these are first conversations. Again, the fifth good thing is that good connection inspires or ignites this desire for more connection. And so, we certainly do hope that this conversation will continue. The video will be posted at some point in the nearish future, and that's all. See how definitive I am. In the nearish, the video will be there. It'll be a place to go back to and have conversations with other people, with your own communities, and we will keep going and we will keep growing together. So for now, I would just again say thank you so much to everyone. Oh my God, Myriam, Harry, Ryan, just big heart, big hugs, and thank you so much to everyone. It's been a wonderful gathering.
Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you so much. It's been great to be together.
Thank you. Great.